I don't think this can pass easily through the immigration. All right, and thank you for Project of Hope for inviting us to Austria. It's actually my second time of visiting Austria. The first time was to go to Graz for a conference on climate change. And I had the pleasure of going through the tunnels in the mountain and seeing what was done many years ago, and also with some young people who were preparing for a festival called Elevate, to elevate, you know. But coming this time around has been a very unique experience for me, and because of the very special warmth that you've extended to all of us, and the very beautiful reception, and having the opportunity of speaking to children in secondary schools, and later on becoming friends with them on Facebook. That is just wonderful. And thank you all for coming out this Saturday morning. I know there are very many exciting things you could be doing, but to come to listen to us is also very special. This morning I will be speaking on overcoming the fossil crisis, and I'm doing this because I wanted to get a perspective about the kind of struggles that I've been engaged in for over 20 years now, and for which I believe I'm going to spend the rest of my life still campaigning, unless we see a major shift from this paradigm, this kind of civilization. The fossil fuel civilization has taken the world as far as it could. I think we've got to the terminal point of this civilization, and we don't have to wait until we are plunged into absolute catastrophe. The use of fossil fuel has given humanity the idea that growth can go on without any interruption, that development in the pattern that we're seeing can continue to go without any sense of control, without having to think about the future, and without recognition of the fact that fossil fuels are not renewable, and whether one day or the other they're going to be exhausted finally. And the major thrust of our campaign has been that we don't have to wait until fossil fuels are exhausted before we move away from it. We know that this dependence on this mode of civilization has, at this point, brought the world major economic crisis, financial crisis, the food crisis, the energy crisis, the climate crisis, all kinds of crises you can think about. It's not only that oil is getting exhausted, we're also exhausting almost every other resource on the planet Earth. Species are going extinct at a faster rate than before. The fish stock is depleting. Water is becoming an item that is not easy to get by. It's causing crisis in some places in the world, because we just do things as if we control everything. And this is the major crisis that has a direct impact on where I come from. I come from Nigeria. I come from the Niger Delta, where oil has been extracted in the past 54 years. Just as old as I am, so is the oil industry in Nigeria, 54 years. And so on. And it has major health impacts. Major health impact causing bronchitis, asthma, blood disorders, miscarriages, acid rain. And the poor people in the communities use corrugated iron sheets for their roofs. And because of the acid rain, they have to replace their roofs so frequently because they get corroded. And the disturbance of the ecology is so mammoth, so much that, and all this because mankind has developed an appetite and addiction to fossil fuels. Crude oil, natural gas, coal, and now tar sands. And of course, I'm sure you heard about attempts or some thinking that fracking can be done in Lake Constance. I mean, this is totally insane. To think that anybody could go to that pristine, beautiful environment and begin to destroy it. But that is what is happening in other places in the world. That's what has happened to where I come from. When I look at photographs of the Niger Delta in the around 19th century, because the photos, where they don't go too far back, but you can see 19th century photos, you see very beautiful environment. You see very green environment. You see people who are healthy and engaged in their means of livelihood. You see productivity. You see a place that looks like paradise. But today, all that is almost gone. And we are fighting to be sure that what is left is not destroyed by multinational oil corporations and their collaborators who are the local corporations also working in the sector. And also by people who have been pushed to very odd behavior because of the degradation that they've seen around them for so many years. There's a situation where when I look at the whole Africa, I look at the map, Nigeria is right there. I live somewhere here, and the Niger Delta is about this area, the whole of this area, where we have two major river systems in Nigeria. One starts from Cameroon and comes down, another one starts from Guinea and comes all the way through to and they all meet at the middle of the country and come to the Atlantic Ocean. And where the Niger River enters the ocean, the whole of that area is filled with crude oil and gas. And when you saw the video that I showed, you can find it replicated in about 250 locations across the Niger Delta. In fact, if you look at the satellite pictures of the Delta in the night, you think there's a lot of electricity in that area, part of Africa, but it's not. You're seeing the gas flaring. People cannot see a dark night. And we love to see the moon, the stars, to tell stories at night, but that is banished in many of the villages where you find these gas flares. And it's very unfortunate that Africa just seems to be so rich in resources. It's been the back house where resources are extracted, either as human energy through slavery, the invasion for palm oil at the turn of the 19th century, and all kind. Now it's crude oil. And everywhere you look on the continent, you find one resource. This map is not very current. This was in 2006. If you were to be drawn today, you find oil fields all around Africa, all along here. There are oil fields. And then right in the middle also, nowhere, everywhere. The war in Sudan was about oil. The conflict we still have between South and North is about oil. The conflicts anywhere you look here. Even the war against Gaddafi was not really against the dictator. It was against, it was to secure who would be the most favored to have access to unlimited oil from that territory. And so if you want to do that, you have to inflict maximum power to destroy, kill, and then grab that black gold. And you see that replicated around the world. So the truth has to be told that it's not about dictatorship. It's about who gets most favored conditions to extract crude oil and gas and grab the resources. And nobody cares what happens. Nobody cares what happens to those communities and the people, as long as the resources can flow. And those who have the power can keep on having their pleasure subsidized by poor people dying in Nigeria and elsewhere. And right in Nigeria, situation is where oil is extracted in villages and small benefits get to the urban areas. So rural poverty is deepened, and I would not say urban prosperity, because even when you have an economy that is merely distributive and not productive, that is not the way to live. Our life demands that we should be workers. I believe that man was created to work, to take care of the environment, to be responsible for things around us, to live in harmony with Mother Earth. Now we have, these are just some details about how many oil fields, oil wells in Nigeria. A total of, this is very important, total of 7,000. I have to come to point at this. We have 7,000 kilometers worth of pipelines, and about, you can see the numbers there, it's quite a lot. And in this territory, the population is about 30 million people. 30 million people assaulted by an invasion force that is so powerful, both in our continent and elsewhere. And they will tell you they behave in a very responsible way. Please don't believe the oil corporations. I'm yet to see one that behaves responsibly anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. But more, if you check my country, or in Africa, or Latin America, or in Asia, if you can find one that has behaved responsibly, please let me know. I want to be able to balance my opinion about them. But no one have ever shown me. And I've asked the oil companies to show me in Nigeria one oil spill that they've ever cleaned. Because the production, the extraction of crude oil, the fossil fuel is so destructive in every manner you can think about, right from when seismic data is being collected. Forests are cut through, dynamites are exploded in the forests, in the waters, disturbing the ecosystem. When the drilling is being done, you have drilling mods, some toxic elements being released. When the oil is piped through the pipelines are built, kept above the ground in most of the places. They are over 30 years old, and the lifespan should be 15 years or thereabout. So the pipelines are old, aged, the facilities are wretched, but because they manage to pump oil through, they are left in service. And so they break up so frequently. And because they break up so frequently and oil companies don't want to respond to it, they always tell you, oh, the accident was caused by sabotage. It's a lookup, so the victims are blamed for every accident in the oil field. Now, I'm not saying that there are not actions, that there are not elements of sabotage. That does happen. But it would not add up to more than 10% of the incident that we have. But the oil companies claim otherwise. They claim 90% sabotage, 10% from their beautiful, ancient, archaic equipment that fail at the least pressure. And then, of course, the corruption that comes from the oil sector is so enormous because the powerful and the power and the wealth that come from the sector, and because the poor people and the environment subsidize all this kind of extraction, there's bound to be a lot of profit because they're not really paying the true cost of the oil. The true cost of the oil and the gas can best be measured in the blood and lives that are lost and environment that is destroyed and the suffering of the people. We've got very emblematic leaders who have been killed because for the pleasure of companies like Shell, someone like Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was murdered by the state on 10th November 1995 at the pleasure. Shell, in fact, had a lawyer in court holding what is called a watching brief. A watching brief. My understanding is that that brief was the watching brief was to make sure that he was convicted along with the other leaders and murdered so that the Ogoni people will keep quiet and Shell could go back to exploit. But since 1993, the Ogoni people had driven Shell out of Ogoni land, and I'm glad to announce to you that Shell would never return to Ogoni land. I'm very glad about that. I mean, it's not something to celebrate about, but I celebrate the resilience of the people to show that a people united cannot be defeated. That's what we chant on the street. A people united will never be defeated. It sounds better in Spanish. But I've not managed to learn it. I've got it written down. Sometimes I read it when we are chanting it, but thereafter I forget it. Perhaps because of all the gas flares and oil pollution that I've had to contend with. Now, this is what happens when oil pipelines are being built. The pipeline, this pipeline is being built through the forest, and you find that at least every pipeline has a right-of-way of 30 to 40 meters. So you go through the forest, you cut, and this place must never have trees or vegetation growing here anymore, ever. As long as the pipeline is here, it's only grass that can grow here. So when you have, it's not only in Nigeria, I've seen it in many other places. When you have this kind of business going on, you have lines like this cutting through the whole forest. The forest is clearly degraded. It impacts the people cannot farm there, they cannot hunt there, they cannot do anything there. It's just taken up so that oil can flow. And this, if you fly over the delta, you would think that somebody was drawing maybe a map through the forest. They're just all pipelines. Pipelines damaging everything. And sometimes we hear a lot about all these impacts of the deforestation, pollution, a lot of waste are dumped everywhere, livelihoods are damaged, health, of course. I will talk a bit more about the health aspect. And then with regard to climate change, the burning of fossil fuels, that's the major driving force behind global warming. And this is why if the world is really serious about confronting global warming, we're not going to allow false solutions that allow polluters, especially in Europe and North America, to continue to pollute and merely pay for a forest patch in Africa or Latin America or Asia and believe that the forest, the carbon being stored in the trees over there, permits you to pollute over here. I think it's the mathematics that has entered the United Nations system, but it's actually pure fiction because the trees don't live forever and the carbon will be released one day. And you secure one forest to claim carbon credits, and then the rest of the forest is being degraded by others. And sometimes they cut down trees and convert them to plantations, and the plantations are believed to have the same carbon stock as natural trees. I think this kind of fiction that has captured even the World Agricultural Organization of United Nations is really very shameful. Somebody officially defining a plantation as equal to a forest. It's incredible. A plantation can never be a forest. A plantation is one tree planted 1 million times, 2 million times. A forest has a multiplicity of trees. It has creeping plants. It has animals right there. It has butterflies and many things. But you have a plantation with chemicals sprayed all the time, you just go into a forest. Total silence. That is not a forest. And the communities can't use, they can't do anything there. A plantation is a commercial investment. A forest is a natural place. I mean, I went to Christian to up the mountain to the church on the, I don't know the name of the place, and we just, you could feel, look at the trees, variety of gates of the sizes, so beautiful, and people are walking through the forest, reflecting on nature, being connected. If you go to a plantation, walk around plantation, all the trees are equal spacing, one from another, the same size, the same color, maybe the same height. I mean, if you go there, you feel that this is not a natural place. And in fact, you will know that you are in the wrong place. A plantation may be good for cultivating firewood and trees for some things, but let's record, I'm not saying don't have plantations, but please don't convert our forests to plantations, and don't tell me that a plantation is a forest, because it is not. Now, Nigeria produces, at the moment, about 2.4 million barrels of crude oil officially every day. And over the past 54 years, the country has earned millions of dollars, billions, from this resource. And so the government of Nigeria is very rich. It's not poor at all. Nowadays, the debate is about how much money will be spent in feeding in the presidency. That's what the budget is being debated about. But the people are desperately poor because the wealth of the government is not the same as the wealth of the people. But when you read the economic indices, you find that Nigeria is having a roaring economic growth. 7% GDP growth, 8%, 9%, but nobody's talking about the poverty level. Poverty is growing at a faster rate than the GDP, which shows a clear disconnect between what is known as economic growth and what is the quality of life of people in those places. But when you look only at the indices produced by the World Bank and economists of the International Monetary Fund, then you can say, okay, yeah, it's good. We can keep doing what we're doing to those people because the economy is growing. And then everybody says, well, if what you are doing is adding so much to the economy, I don't really mind the destruction of human lives, abuse of human rights, abuse of the environment as far as this is happening. So the fiction helps to anesthetize, kind of numb those who would rise to act. And this is why we keep saying that the truth must be told no matter who is offended or who is. So we had just a list of oil spills. The latest oil spill, I would say the 20th December 2011 by Shell. It's an offshore oil spill about 100 kilometers offshore. Shell announced that it was 40,000 barrels. But we do know that whenever they announce this, you have to multiply it by a certain factor because they always underestimate. When the Gulf of Mexico oil spill occurred in 2010, BP first said that 1,000 barrels were released. When people said, no, it cannot be, they said, okay, it's 5,000 barrels. And when the government said this is not true, they said, okay, it's 10,000 barrels. And they kept moving it every week. Eventually, they said 25,000 barrels. But everybody knows that at least it was about 100,000 or more barrels. And so oil companies cannot be trusted to say the truth. This oil spill that occurred 9th November, just a couple of days ago, offshore, also 25 kilometers offshore, close to where I come from, ExxonMobil announced that it was just 100 barrels that spilled into the ocean. And the oil spill is spreading over a long stretch of the coastline. So I said, okay, so 100 barrels can stretch and cover so much extent. And then the barrel must be as big as this building, because they were clearly not saying the truth. And that up to, over the past 4 years, the NOSRA is the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency. And they said that we have got over 3,400 oil spills in the past 4 years. That's almost average of 1 oil spill a day. It's massive oil spills. And I said, show me 1 oil spill that has been cleared properly. Right now, we are helping community people, some poor farmers, to sue Shell in the Netherlands, in a court in Netherlands. The case is going on. We're waiting for judgment on 30th January 2013. And it's all about oil spill that occurred around 2004, 2008, 2009, that Shell has said they've cleaned up. And so we're asking them to prove to the court that they've cleaned those oil spills. If I should take you to the communities I'm talking about, you find that the whole water bodies are still covered with crude oil. In fact, in one particular village called Goi, nobody lives there anymore because everything destroyed. Fish ponds, the entire water body, nobody lives there anymore. Ogoi is a community in Ogoni. Every citizen of Goi is now a refugee somewhere else in Ogoni land. And Shell says they've cleaned the environment. And we're saying, prove it. I go there frequently. I was there about a month ago. There's been no difference. If you go there a month from now, there'll be no difference. It's only if the government agrees to begin a cleanup of Ogoni land based on the recent study done by United Nations Environment Program. That's when Goi environment may have a hope of being recovered. And that study by the United Nations showed us that every water body in Ogoni land is polluted, both surface water and groundwater. And scientists estimate it will require 30 years to clean the waters in Ogoni land, 30 years. And 5 years to clean the land, because the land is polluted to a depth of 5 meters in many places. And they said you should clean the land first before cleaning the water. That means a cumulative 35 years needed to clean up Ogoni land. And you should know that life expectancy in where I'm talking about is 41 years. And many people die in their 20s and 30s. So you have people being born in pollution, they live and grow up in pollution, they die in pollution, and they're buried in pollution. I've never seen a grave deeper than 5 meters. And so the struggle for environmental justice for me is a struggle for life. It's a struggle for dignity. It's a struggle to recover our memory as human beings, as our memory as citizens of a planet that we ought to respect one another and respect Mother Earth. It is not what I do occasionally. It's what I dream of. It's what I wake up with. I see it around me every day. I see it many places I go to. And so whenever any country announces they found oil, in my mind, war has been declared in that nation. Because the oil business is like war against the planet and against the people. Well, the tar sands, I believe you all know about how destructive. Tar sands business actually shows us that as man gets more desperate about sustaining this fossil fuel-less civilization, they are ready to do incredible things just to keep the machinery going. And so the Albertine area of Canada is so devastated, so destroyed. But the government, that's the democracy. Because some people tell me it's because you don't have democracy in Africa. That's why this about Canada is not a democracy. In Nigerian English, we say democracy is them all crazy. And I think that must be what it really means. Because you cannot have democracy, and then people are saying no. I went to communities in Ireland. The whole village, the whole communities in Moyo County, County Moyo in Ireland, on every electric pole they have a sign: no consent, no consent. We don't approve of Shell building a gas pipeline here, building a gas refinery here, all over the community. And guess what? The pipeline is being built. Is that democracy? It's them all crazy. That's what it is. And then fracking. I hear people say gas prices are coming down in the United States, so factories are going to move from Europe to the US instead of moving to China or somewhere in Asia. I said, good for you. Move the factories to the US. But fracking, what is it doing to the US? Fracking is one of the most immoral way of extracting gas, because one of the things it does is to disrupt natural cycle. The amount of water being used in fracking and the chemical used is not disclosed. But then half of the water used in fracking can never be recovered. Never, you know, water normally, if you use in the sewage, it goes back to nature, and then it purifies, or you purify it and you use it again. But the ones in fracking, 50% must be stored somewhere. Can't be expected to return to natural water cycle, otherwise it's going to cause pollution. So somebody wants to drill in Lake, where's Lake Kosten? Is it this way or this way? Lake Kosten? Somewhere here. Somebody wants to frack on any part of it, whether it's in Austria, in Germany, or Switzerland area, or whatever. I think that kind of idea must be banished, because it would not only, if that is done in this pristine, beautiful environment, you can be sure that they're going to frack and fry the whole world. That's a picture of one oil spill location. That is one of my colleagues, just tearing the broth. I went to an oil spill location recently with some senators in Nigeria, and went to a location where the oil spill occurred 40 years ago. And what Shell did was just to turn the soil. They put the shovel and turn the soil. But this oil comes out again. And it looks as bad as it did 40 years ago, because they don't want to invest in cleanup. They don't want to do anything that affects their profit. If the corporations behave responsibly in Nigeria, and we sit down to calculate what money has come in and what needs to be cleaned up to clean the place up, I believe that we've run a deficit economy. Because all the money earned from crude oil cannot clean up the Nigerian environment today. This is why we're struggling to stop the expansion of the pollution by stopping the expansion of the oil fields. And we've presented to the Nigerian government what can be done to stop the expansion of the oil field without losing revenue. In fact, increasing revenue. We've not got any hearing yet, but we'll not give up, because we believe that this sector just has to stop. The oil sector goes against everything that the world wants to do, to stop poverty, to increase education, gender equality, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, fight AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and global partnership. Oil destroys all that. So as long as, in a place like Nigeria, as long as we keep focused on the way we are on crude oil and allow the corporations to run riot across the land, none of these goals will be achieved, except in fiction. I just threw this in to give a picture of one of the biggest lakes in Africa. It's Lake Chad, shared by, it's at the northeast of Nigeria, shared by Niger Republic, Chad, and Cameroon. This was the extent of the water in 1963. By 1973, this was the extent of the water. And right now, the water, that's about the amount of reasonable depth of water you can find. And this can be attributed to a number of factors, including water management, and also the expansion of the Sahara Desert, as well as global warming generally. And so what this has meant is that all the pastoralists who depended on grazing areas around here, the fisher folks who were fishing here, many of them had now been displaced and are climate refugees migrating further downward south of Nigeria, maybe some migrating to Europe. Now, as they migrate downward to Nigeria with their cattle, they meet with farmers who need their land for farming. And so you hear about conflicts in the middle section of Nigeria, violence. It is, and they tell you it's about Muslims fighting Nigeria, fighting Christians. Many times, it's just an ecological conflict. It's not about religion. Many of the pastoralists are neither Christian nor Muslims. But they conflict because they need the environmental resources. And we're fighting in our struggle to connect to the thinking of the government that you cannot be flaring gas in the south and then planting trees in the north and thinking that the trees will stop the spread of the desert. The desert will climb any tree. The desert can climb any building. So we have to take real action to reduce pollution, to reduce emissions, if we hope to contribute our quota in the fight against global warming. So the environment, to me, is one of the mechanisms that we can use to unite the nation, to build a movement for environmental sustainability, to build a movement for social justice, using the environment as an emblem. And this is one of the things that I do, building networks in villages and communities across the nation and letting them see that their future is interconnected. And the same message I bring to you this morning, that our future as citizens of this planet is all interconnected. We are one human race, we have one planet, we are one people. Whatever happens elsewhere affects the other place. You cannot keep a blind eye to degradation elsewhere in the world, because what happens in one place eventually goes around to other places. This is why our struggle is very political also, and I believe that pollution is political, conscious decision. I like to show this slide of Lawrence Summers, who was one time advisor to President Obama, and at this time he was a big-time economist in the World Bank, chief economist in the World Bank, and he said that Africa is underpolluted. So it's okay to dump waste, to dump pollution, toxic and nuke, whatever kind of waste, good to dump in Africa. And the economic argument was that because Africans would not live to grow old enough to have prostate cancer, then let them die off. It's better to kill them than to kill people who would live long and need to live a good life. So that makes economic sense, doesn't it? But we cannot use economic sense to destroy the world, to destroy people. I understand that pollution does not happen by accident. It's a conscious political decision. We have to fight pollution. In the US, the refineries are built in poor communities. In Africa, poor people are suffering the impacts of mining, either gas or for gold or diamond. They are made to fight themselves and destroy themselves. All these are political. So we need to have a mass. We're working, and this is why I'm so engaged in mass movements, working for environmental justice, so that we can all stand together and connect the dots around the world and confront what we're seeing around us. I love this quotation. It's not my word. Sometimes people say I said it. I did not say it. The Stone Age did not end for lack of stones. It was said by a former foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, a country that swims in crude oil. And he said the Stone Age did not end for lack of stones, and the crude oil age would not end for lack of crude oil. I completely believe it. So at many places around the world, we are fighting to keep the oil in the soil and keep the coal in the hole. In Ogoni, in Costa Rica, in Yasuni, in Ecuador, in Lofoten, in Norway, in South Sudan, and everywhere. We have to globalize, and in fact now we must leave the gas in Lake Constance. So that's a new one to be added to the list. How are we going to get out of this? Sometimes it's very depressing for me to talk about this, but I know that what we really need is a mental shift, because the logic of the distortion we're seeing is that of capital accumulation without responsibility. A system of endless growth and endless what they call progress that means competition and distortion, a situation where war is a business and where you have about double the population of the world, the number of bullets, and they're still manufacturing more. You know, when you see this situation, I think we really need to think again about who are we and why are we on this planet? Are we accidents? Do we have a responsibility to what happens to the next person? Can we speak up and secure a safe environment? Can we fight these powers and break their grip on public institutions? Can citizens regain their power? Can we learn from the uprisings in North Africa, in the Middle East, in the Occupy movement, the uprisings that rose and were nipped all across the continents? Is there something to learn about recovery of people's sovereignty over political structures? Is it possible to build an ecological social movement where everyone is connected and we work together to fight for our future? I think all the answers must be yes. And I end with this quote from Mahatma Gandhi. He said, many people, especially ignorant people, want to punish you for speaking the truth, for being correct, for being you. He said, never apologize for being correct or for being years ahead of your time. If you are right and you know it, speak your mind. Even if you're a minority of one, the truth is still the truth. I thank you for your attention.